Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode number 9 of the InTransit Podcast, brought to you by host Nurfad Nadarevic and sponsored by absolutely nobody still. Today, we're going to be kind of continuing off of what we talked about in episode 8, and that was heavy oversized shipments / shipping. Today, we are focusing on kind of the land side of that and how that all functions. But, there's really only one way to transport heavy equipment, pre-manufactured construction assemblies, and hundreds of thousands of other oversized items from one place to another. And that is along the highways that trucks can carry oversized and overweight loads on. Almost daily on any busy interstate or other major highway, drivers are likely to see overdimensional or oversized load. So when we're looking at oversized and overweight loads, they're really defined as any combination of vehicle and load that exceeds one or more of the legal maximum dimensions of width, height, and or length by definition, and this would be an oversized load. Most of these loads are non-divisible, non-divisable, however you want to say it, and cannot easily be broken down into smaller parts that fit within the dimensions of a normal load, so to speak. And the most commonly exceeded dimension is width. The National System of Interstates and other major U.S. highways has travel lanes that are 12 or more feet wide. This allows a margin of nearly 2 feet on each side of a vehicle or load that is 8.5 feet wide, the maximum legal width in every state. Any load greater than 8.5 feet wide, for example, a bulldozer with a blade that is 10 feet wide, is an oversized wide load, and a permit and certain safety procedures are definitely required to haul that bulldozer on public roads. In respect to width, there's also height, and height can be an issue. Excessive height or even length can also be defined as an oversized load. There are no single legal nationwide values for height or length. For example, the typical legal state maximum height ranges between 13.5 and 14.5 feet high, and the legal overall length can extend up to 75 feet under specific conditions. This discussion really applies to loads that will require a permit to be hauled. There are occasions when a load may exceed the legal length, but only require that the load be marked with safety flags to be transported legally. Oversized loads may also be overweight, and the reverse is not true. Overweight loads may easily fit within the space of a normal truck, such as a gravel hauler or standard 43-foot trailer. And on this national network, the maximum permissible gross vehicle weight for legal loads is 80,000 pounds, and it's further limited by maximum weights for axles. For example, 20,000 pounds for a single axle, 34,000 pounds for a tandem axle, etc. So while overweight loads may cause a hazard to other traffic, overweight vehicles may cause damage to the highway structure and bridges if the gross weight and or weight per axle exceed the load carrying limits of the roadway. And at some point in time, we'll talk about different limitations and things of that nature when it comes to seasonality and when these loads can move, depending what the ground is like, whether we're talking about winter or summer months. So, who has interest in or are influenced by oversized and overweight loads? So commerce and defense, the topic of oversized loads would not be an issue if no aspect of commerce, industry, or government did not require the occasional movement of very large pieces of equipment or construction assemblies, like bridge spans, etc. So the ability to move large loads from the point of origin to the point of delivery is really vital. So additionally, the Department of Defense may require the movement of heavy armor or defense equipment to locations where heavy lift aircraft cannot operate. And in addition to this, other interests are the driving public, obviously. The very fact that there is a clear emphasis on the safe operation of oversized vehicles indicates the need to ensure operations that do not cause an undue hazard to all the other vehicle operators on the highway. This results in certain restrictions, such as prohibiting movement during holidays, weekends, and in some cases, the days immediately before or after a holiday, recognizing that there is likely to be increased public travel on these roads. Other interest groups or areas would be cities and communities, obviously. So oversized loads can interrupt the normal flow of traffic. They can block lanes. They can cause traffic delays. So many municipal areas restrict the movement on oversized loads during normal business hours or in the vicinity of schools. There's also the state highway departments. So states must staff and provide facilities for issuing of permits, maintaining the roads, and operating state inspection stations and scales, and enforce regulations relative to the movement of oversized vehicles. The oversized overweight trucking industry is another interest group, so to speak. So, this industry has its own kind of craziness to it. In addition to the trucking companies and their drivers, there are brokers who do contract these services, their services and their customers and the businesses that support the oversized hauling operations, including vendors of like safety equipment and signs, as well as contracted escort vehicle operators would be, so it's obviously there's a lot of groups at play, a lot of people that have a vested interest in making sure that, these loads are able to move interstate, intrastate, internationally, etc. The federal government, through the Code of Federal Regulations, or the CFR, and the Federal Highway Administration, defines the size and weight standards to not only keep trucks and buses moving safely, but also to protect and preserve the nation's highway system. The Federal Highway Administration, though, is not directly involved in the day-to-day enforcement of oversized overweight carriers. That's actually left to each state to do on their own. So the national vehicle size standards apply on the national level, so including the interstate highway system and the federal highways capable of safely handling larger commercial vehicles. And this national network consists of more than 200,000 miles of highways. Each individual state maintains its own set of highway regulations. Each state is responsible for ensuring that commercial motor vehicles such as trucks, buses, tractor trailers comply with both state and federal standards. And in addition to this, many state roads are not built to federal standards and may not safely accommodate either oversized or overweight loads. So, with respect to that, individual states apply their own limits to dimensions and weights for different categories of roadways. As an example, a local 2-lane road may not safely permit loads more than 8 feet wide, for example. Furthermore, there are many requirements to move loads that significantly exceed the dimension and weight limits of state and federal highways. So to ensure the safety of the driving public, to protect the integrity of the nation's roads and highways, and to comply with federal requirements, and the state requires applications for permits, issued permits for transportation or to move oversized and overweight vehicles and loads on their roads. So when you're looking at it, what exactly does an oversized load look like? The trailer is 8.5 feet wide. The tires are more than 9 feet wide and are permitted as an oversized load. In road transportation, in road transport, an oversized load or overweight load is a load that exceeds the standard or ordinary legal size and or weight limits for a specified portion of road or highway. So examples of oversized loads include construction equipment, pre-built homes, bulldozers, construction elements like beams and generators, wind turbines, wind generator propellers, tires for mining equipment. There's thousands of examples. You can spend an entire podcast just talking about the different examples. The legal dimensions and weights vary between states, and a vehicle that exceeds the legal dimensions usually requires a permit defining the size, weight, and the nature of the load and the origin and destination of the load itself. For the fees for permits are determined by the nature of the load and may vary from state to state, actually. So the permit usually specifies the route the load must follow, as well as the dates and times during which the load may travel and the safety equipment required for such maneuvers. The vehicle has 2 tandem axles and a steer axle. The gross weight of 80,000 pounds is distributed properly across the axles. There are federally mandated maximum weight limits, like, for example, 23 CFR Part 658-17 will explain that. So the CFR limits weights to 20,000 per single axle, 34,000 per tandem axle, and 80,000 pounds gross vehicle weight. The vehicle gross weight may be exceeded by permits, provided the maximum weight on any axle group is not exceeded as suggested. The requirements for oversized and overweight trucking operators are kind of twofold. You're ensuring that the load can be moved safely and legally from its point of origin to its destination, and that it's obtaining the necessary permits by state to move that load. For larger oversized loads, such as widths up to 15 feet or heights exceeding 13.5 feet, a route survey may be required prior to the haul. It must be determined that overhead utility lines, bridges, and overpasses, overhead signs do not pose a contact hazard. For overweight loads, it must be determined that trucks do not overstress bridges and overpasses, and that weight is properly distributed across the axles to protect roadways. Now, with respect to state regulations and permits, states grant special use permits to motor vehicles, including vehicles towing manufactured housing that exceed the federal 102 inches width limitation. As mentioned earlier, each state is responsible for setting specific legal size and weight limitations for its highways. These regulations, however, go beyond just the size of the load. States often set specific guidelines for time of travel, safety equipment requirements, weather conditions, and the cost of permits. In addition, different load dimensions and weights may require different routes, safety equipment, the running hours, and the need for a pre-trip highway survey. And as stated, states are responsible for issuing permits for oversized and overweight loads. And in some cases where the loads of similar dimensions as weight, such as manufactured housing units, or for other regular shipments of the same type, annual permits for multiple moves may actually be issued by the states. Many oversized and overweight loads are one-time events and are issued a permit for that specific movement. Depending on the state and the nature and size of the load, it may take several weeks to obtain the necessary permit. If the load is going to travel through several states, the operator will have to apply for permits for each state. Typically, these permits are issued for movements on specific dates. It is necessary to submit applications well in advance, since it may take several weeks to obtain the needed permits. For me specifically, I had situations where I had to apply for permits during COVID for some over-dimensional stuff, and let me tell you, I mean, we waited at some points like 5 weeks, 6 weeks to get the permits. So then everything that was moving, and it was just generators that were being moved, they had to move on specific dates well after the permit was handled. So we had to like consistently go back and forth with the customer to make sure that timelines were being met. But Yeah, I mean, you're throwing things your way, curveballs that you have to just work through. It's good if you can have a good permit company that can work on these for you. If you don't have in-house people that will do this for you as a trucking company, or even a heavy haul or overdimensional broker. If you don't have contacts, it's best to try to build relationships with people that can get these permits ASAP, so you can definitely do your customer a favor with respect to that. Now, each state has their own kind of way of looking at it. The running time is important. So when scheduling the haul, the operator should keep in mind that hours of movement may be restricted. The rules and regulations enforced by the state transportation departments often include added delays. Many states do restrict movement on federal and even state holidays. Permitted travel times vary widely between states and in cities and communities within a state as well. So many states restrict movements of oversized loads to daylight hours only. These restrictions may only apply to state highways and not interstates or to all roads. These restrictions may also vary according to the size of the oversized load. For example, loads greater than 10 feet may be restricted to daylight hours, while oversized loads no more than 10 feet wide may move at night on interstates and 4-lane divided highways. In some cases, maximum width loads may be required to move at night during periods of least traffic. When moving loads through several states, operators must review the requirements on each permit for each state to fully understand and comply with each set of regulations. Also note, please, that overweight loads that are not oversized may travel at times that oversized loads may not. So you got to really kind of play it by ear and see, what the commodity is, where it's going to, where it's going from, at what time of day, what season, what's going on locally currently, in terms of weather conditions. Like, there's so many things in play here that will affect the running time in any given instance. In addition to this, obviously, you got to have safety equipment. Every oversized and overweight load requires certain safety equipment and must follow specific operating procedures to ensure the safety of the operation and to alert other vehicle operators on the highway. Oversized loads or wide load banners are something that's out there for use. Safety equipment includes warning signs such as oversized loads or wide load banners on the front and rear of the vehicles, hauling the load and or escort vehicles accompanying the load. The size of the banner varies from state to state, but most require a banner that is 7 feet wide and 18 inches high with letters that are 12 inches high. All banners require black letters on a yellow reflective background. Banners should be mounted high enough to be clearly visible to other drivers. In a very few states, though, the hauling truck is not required to have the banner if the pilot or escort cars have the required banners to do this. Tall loads, 13 foot 6 inches and below is a legal height on the interstate where you can pass all bridges with no issues. When you exceed 13 feet 6 inches tall, most states, but not all, require a permit to guide the truck along, and a front pole escort may be required. Even greater heights may require additional route surveys, front pole escorts, and other requirements that may vary due to varying safety standards in each state. At these heights, you have to be routed off highways to avoid overpasses, and bucket trucks may be required to lift wires and remove overhead signs, and very likely police escorts may be needed. As the height of the transported load increases, some states may deny travel, while others require so many additional reviews that it may take up to a year to obtain a permit. And just because one state approves your exit from that specific state doesn't necessarily mean that another border state with that state will approve your entrance. So this is what makes overheight loads really crazy at times to deal with. When it comes to wide loads, as the load exceeds the trailer width, state issued permits, safety flags, and an oversized banner will be required. As the width increases, flashing lights and or one or more escort vehicles may be required. If the load width exceeds the normal lane width of the road, escort vehicles will be required and additional route reviews may be required. And as you move into like super load territory, you can expect weeks or months for permit approvals from each state along the route. And sometimes third-party reviews, police escorts, utility approval, and other safety checks may actually be required to be given authorization. There's also warning flags and lights. An over width or over length vehicle or load in combination requires bright red or orange warning flags for daytime, or amber and red lights at night at the extreme corners and extensions of the load. Flags must be securely attached to the load by one corner or displayed on a flag staff. Flags must be either 18 inches square or 12 inches square, depending on, of course, state requirements. Flags should be clean and in good condition. The illustrations below, in terms of doing this, would look like essentially 4 flags that are given on the corners of the furthest point of the load. So if the load's on, picture it on a trailer with the 4 specific warning flags on the most extreme locations furthest from the trailer. So like the 4 corners of a square load, for example. And flags may be needed only on the ends of simple protrusions if no other part of the load exceeds the legal limit. And that would be kind of like where you have only, like, let's say the back end of the load is protruding the trailer, so you would have flags on that. But anything within the trailer, within the trailer dimensions, in the width area, you wouldn't need those flags for on those 2 corners. Warning lights are required for movement at night and during periods of reduced visibility. Warning lights should be either amber, forward and sides, or red, rear and rear overhangs, and should be visible for up to 500 feet. In some states, flashing or strobe lights are required. Warning lights follows a locating pattern similar to the placement of flags. So loads that extend beyond the ends of the hauling vehicle are called overhangs. And the extremities of rear overhangs that extend more than 4 feet beyond the vehicle must be marked with flags for the daytime and red lights at night. Longer overhangs are legal in some states. If the overhang is less than 2 feet wide, a single flag or light at the end of the overhang is required. If the overhang is more than 2 feet wide, the rear corners of the overhang should be marked with flags, and lights if required for night movement in the way that this functions. The flags and the lights, if needed, for overhang should be displayed as mentioned, where it's very visible for people that will be on the roads during the transit of these overdimensional pieces. During daylight hours, a single flag at the end of the overhang that is less than 2 feet wide is required. If the overhang is more than 2 feet wide, a flag at each corner is required as well. Some states require rotating or flashing amber light at top of the cab of the vehicle. The requirement for escort vehicles also varies by state. We mentioned that in previous podcasts. Some states require all oversized loads to be accompanied by escort vehicles, while others require escorts or oversized loads that exceed certain dimensions. Most states will allow operation of vehicles with banners and lights that vary from their requirements if the load markings comply with the requirements of the originating state. But you should definitely confirm during the permitting process if what you want to use is acceptable, because you don't want to be fined or in situations where the DOT gets to you. But yeah, so that's today's kind of overview of overdimensional and overweight pieces, and kind of just the initial safety and permitting phase of a load. every single state and province has its own rules when it comes to this kind of stuff. So we literally could sit here and talk for 24 hours about this, and we wouldn't get through all the states. But each state has their own running hours and holiday restrictions rules. They have their own oversized load banner regulations and requirements. They have their warning lights, the color and the placement requirements. They have their flag requirements. They each state has their own rules that you have to abide by in order to be legal on the road. And again, the name of the game is safety. We talked about this in the last podcast, in the last episode regarding heavy ocean shipping. You know, it's all about safety and making sure that the maneuver goes as pain-free as possible, and injury-free always. You know, you're trying to get it from point A to point B and provide the service to your customer with no risk for injury or, you know, God forbid, something else. So anyways, thank you all for listening. If you like this, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. If you need more details in terms of from a state to state perspective, you can always reach out to me. I can give you all the documentation so you guys can have each state's website where you can check these rules that are constantly updating. And we can go from there. So again, keep it moving, keep it tracking, keep it permitted, keep it legal, keep it safe. And thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.